Hi, y'all. Welcome back to Legally Live. I'm your host, McKinley Mwasaw, criminal defense attorney in Austin, Texas. And today we're going to be going over day 4 of the Kaitlin Armstrong trial. It's currently the day after day 4. There's no court today. The judge announced that the trial was taking a break for today. We'll be back in the courtroom tomorrow. Yesterday was super long. Started off with Colin on the stand again. There was a lot of drama at the courthouse, a lot of drama involving Colin. And he was on the stand, I think, the majority of the day. So I have a ton of notes, like 28 pages of typed notes. I'm not going to go through all of them because that would be crazy. And I have to pick my daughter up from school at some point. But lots of interesting things came out. You can go and like look up the drama involving Mr. Strickland. We don't really have to talk about that here. Yeah, I felt bad for everyone involved, everyone involved in the courtroom and in this very tragic situation. So it is what it is. Let's get started. So I showed up to court a little late yesterday. I got there when I walked in. Colin was on the stand and he was just sitting there with his eyes closed and not talking, and no one else was talking. And I was like, "What is going on?" I just kept looking around. Nothing was happening. Then I realized I think that um, Guillermo Gonzalez must have given. So Guillermo's the prosecutor. It looked like he had given Kofer some documents to go through, and so he was just deciding like which ones he wanted to object to. And eventually Guillermo asks Colin about an issue with, so the documents that they're going to go over are like a cell extraction on Cellubrite. And he asked Colin about reviewing some documents that went over the lost contacts in his phone. So basically, what had happened was Colin told APD that he looked through his blocked numbers and he found, when they did the extraction, they actually showed him a list of all the numbers and emails that were locked in his phone, and there were like 80 or something crazy. And 4 of them he recognized to be people he knew, and he had not blocked them. And the state asked him if one of those people was Mo, and he said yes. And then the state said, were the other 3 females? And he said yes. And the state asked if he blocked them himself, and he said no. So that ends up being a whole thing later on. But needless to say, there were 4 women blocked in his phone when the state showed him the printout, and he hadn't blocked those 4 women. Colin seemed super sad on the stand yesterday. He looked like he didn't want to be there at all. I mean, you can tell he does not want to be there at all. He's seems very, very angry, which I really can't blame him. Um, yeah, I'm not here to judge anybody about this situation, like personally, but I'm sure that it's uncomfortable for him. He looks very uncomfortable, and I feel bad. Um, yeah. So it's almost uncomfortable watching it. Then we see the state is going to try to introduce some documents, and Kofer actually says that it was a whole stack of documents. Kofer objects, saying that he thinks that there's insufficient predicate for one of the documents, but that he thinks it can be established later. And he says that he's not going to object to any of the others, um, but reserves the right to enter the entire records under optional completion. And the judge is like, "Oh, okay, so then you're not objecting to the others. Okay, those are admitted." And then she asked the state for a response. to the defense objection of insufficient predicate. And then Colin's like, oh, judge, we withdraw our objection after clarification. So anyway, so then it's all admitted. And then it's published to the jury, and it's the extraction record, and it's text messages. So the first message that they pull up, I believe that this is Colin's phone extraction, and it says instant message, and it's on 1/6/22. And this was super confusing, and I don't think that we actually ended up getting an answer to this, so I'm curious to find out if we ever do. But it's between he and Mo. And the data stamps on it have telephone numbers listed in it. And so when I'll read you the message first. It says, hey, just did something to my phone, checking to see if this message goes through. And the data stamps on it have the phone numbers of who is on the message thread. And he said when Guillermo gets Colin to look at the phone numbers, Colin says he doesn't actually know who this conversation is between because he recognizes his number on there and he recognizes Mo's number on there. So, but the person that it's from, he doesn't know who that phone number belongs to. So there's 3 phone numbers on this one message. It was sent to 2 people. So it was sent to Kaitlin and to Colin. Not Kaitlin, I'm sorry. To Mo and to Colin, and from some random number. And Guillermo says, we'll go over that number that you don't know later on. But then they never went over the number that he didn't know. So I don't know if we're going to get that from like the cell phone extractor expert person or like somebody from Cellubrite. I have no idea. I'm assuming that's what's going to happen, but I thought that was interesting. Then we just go through a bunch more text messages. So I don't know if I said it before, but all the text messages that we're going over in this chunk are between Mo and Colin. Then there's one from 1/7, and it's from Colin to Mo. It's a picture of her contact card in his phone. He sent it to her. And the state's like, why would you have sent her her own contact card? And he said, I guess to show her that her contact was in my phone. And then she responded, wait, did you get that? So Guillermo gets him to agree that it appears that Mo was having problems messaging with him. But then again, Colin states that he never blocked her. He responds to the prosecutor that he never blocked her. And then there's some more messages. Then there's like a chunk of messages from January 22 of 2022 to May of 2022. The first one we look at is April 11th of 2022, and it's from Mo to Colin. It says, you make it to Santa Rosa. And this was regarding traveling to his sister's house in Santa Rosa when he was making that West Coast trip by himself, where I think on Friday he testified that he actually met up with Mo and had dinner with her at some point. And so he responded back to her and said, very close. And the prosecutor says, so this is just more friendly communication between you and Wilson? And he says, yes. And then on that same day, April 11th, she asks him about a racing rule at a specific race, and he is advising her on that. Then the next one that we jump to is on May 10th of 2022. Mo asks him if he's back in Austin. And the reason she's asking this is because he had been on a long road trip. I guess this is the road trip that started off in California. And then I think he ended up meeting, there's a mosquito in here. I think he ended up meeting Kaitlin. Kaitlin flew out to Tucson to meet him where he did a race. And then they drove back through West Texas. I think there was like a race or something in West Texas. And then they and then they came back to Austin. And so he's just like, making his way back. I think he got back on May 9th. And this message is from May 10th, which is the day before Mo was murdered. And so she ends up telling him she's going to be in Austin. And Colin says to the prosecutor that he did not know that she was going to be doing this specific race. So had no idea she was going to be in Austin. And so he responds back to her and says, hey, just arrived last night to Lockhart, projecting, about to go ride in this. And I guess there's a picture or something. Anyway, they just ask like about each other's plans for the evening. And eventually Mo asks if he's available. Oh no, at 8:50 p.m. she asked him if he's doing the training ride on the 11th, which is the next day. He says he was just going to go riding alone, but how long do you want to ride and what tires are you on? There's a discussion about them possibly getting together for a training ride on the 11th. Then at 9 a.m. on the 11th, Mo sent him a text, but he says he was on a ride already, and he responds several hours later. She asked him if he is available or if he has plans for the evening. He responds and suggests going to the pool and a beverage, and I think they agree. At 3:47 p.m., Mo responds with a pic from her ride and said, sounds great, I'm dying out here. And it was like a picture of her on her ride. And Colin said that what that meant to him is that she was alone by herself in Austin, north of Austin, on a ride, and she had been out there for a while in 100+ degree weather, and she was still out there. And he asked her if she wanted a moto ride to the pool, which meant a motorcycle ride. Anyway, he was at the dentist, I think, when this was happening. And yeah, he was at the dentist. And he was going to pick her up and take her to the pool. At 40:45, he contacts her to finalize plans. She responds. At 4:49, she sent the address of 1708 Maple Avenue, Unit B. And that's the place where she's staying, Cash's house. At 5:43, he responds here. And that just meant he had pulled up into the alleyway. And he also said, Jesus, the traffic. And then he goes on to explain to Guillermo that the traffic on MLK had been really bad and he had been trying to navigate his way around it. Then Guillermo asked him about a phone number. He says, you see that number? What is the name associated with it? And the answer is Christine Wall. Who is that? No one I know, but the name I used for Moriah Wilson in my phone. And so he says, that's Mo's number and name you associated with it. Correct. So he had changed her name to Christine Wall in his phone. Then on May 11th at 9 a.m., a message from Christine Walsh to him asking, what you thinking? And Guillermo says, okay, so this came from an extraction. I don't know whose extraction it came from, if it came from Kaitlin's or what, but Guillermo says it doesn't appear to be a text thread on your phone that reflects this text. Did you delete this text? And he says, I did not. No, this can't be from Kaitlin's phone. It has to be from his phone. But I guess it came from the extraction, not from just looking through his text threads on his actual phone. And so I think what Guillermo's saying is like this message had been deleted from the text thread, which would also make sense. Like if he never got the message, then he couldn't respond back to the message. And that's important because it comes up later. And I think that Colin forgets about this conversation on the stand that he's having with Guillermo during this time when Guillermo says, did you erase it? And he says, no, I didn't erase it. Like the implication there is that somebody else erased it, which makes sense. Like I think they're saying Kaitlin erased it so that he never got it, so that he could not go on the ride with Moriah, and instead ended up going on that ride with Kaitlin, where she only lasted 30 minutes. And then he and his friend had to finish the ride by themselves. Okay. So then we move on to conversations between Armstrong and Colin. There's one. Okay. So I'm not even going to, in June of 2021, they're talking about investing. And she's just like telling him a whole bunch of advice about investing in capital and a bunch of things I didn't even know what she was talking about. But anyway, they just say she's pretty savvy with money, and he says, yeah, it appears that way. And so this is just to show that she's involved in his finances, because she's telling him what he needs to do with money. And then on 10/20/21, there's a message regarding a real estate dispute in Lockhart, and it's between he and Kaitlin. And Guillermo says, what is the status of your relationship with the defendant at this point? Oh, also, Colin never calls her Kaitlin or Armstrong. He only calls her the defendant. He will only refer to her as the defendant. And he's so uncomfortable on the stand that now I can't see him a lot of the time because I am super itty bitty, and I'm sitting for the beginning part. I was sitting like very far back, and all the people in front of me are way taller than me, so I can't see over their heads. I have to stand up to look at him, which is like kind of awkward. I don't actually even know if anybody in the well could tell that I'm standing because I'm that short. Like when I stand, I'm still the same size as the people that are sitting. But I don't want to like make the person on the witness stand like feel more awkward than they already feel if they do see me standing up. So I try not to do it too much, but the few times that I did do it, for the beginning part of his testimony yesterday, he was answering his questions like, so I'm Colin, right? The defense table is over here and the state is over here and the jury's right here. Colin's sitting on the witness stand like this, answering the questions. When it was Kofer, the defense attorney's turn to cross-examine him, Kofer, I noticed, ended up at the witness stand for a majority of the questioning. It seemed like almost like he was like looking for reasons to keep having to go up there. But I'm sure, I mean, it was just so awkward. He was sitting there like this. So Kofer ends up having to come and stand on this side of the jury box, and he's sitting like this, like blocking Kaitlin from being able to see his face the whole time. The whole time. Eventually, like towards the end, I don't know if they just wore him out so much or what, he ended up like dropping his hand from blocking his face, but I think his eyes were closed at that point. So he couldn't see her. Like the trauma, some extreme trauma there. So yeah, very awkward. Okay, so Guillermo asks what the status of his relationship is at this point, and he says he had just ended the relationship. So this is on 10/20/21, and but he agrees they're still having contact regarding business. I mean, they were still living together too, so there's that. He says correct. And then she also says, like later on, she says, I know you know better than to show up at Meteor with that girl. She's referring to Mo. She calls her that girl. And then she says, aside from that, enjoy your eve. Then they end up having like a conversation where he says Mo left like about an hour ago with friends. She's going up to Meteor. I'm not going because I'm trying to respect you. I think he asked her to act like an adult or something. Because he thought that was like an immature thing to say, or passive aggressive or something. I can't remember what he said. And so then she responds and says, and literally just walked in, like she just walked into Meteor, and she had no idea that Mo was going to be there, and she just walked in and can't leave, and Mo's there. And then at 8:05 p.m. or so, he sends a text to Kaitlin saying, did you call Mo? WTF? And it says, what was that about? And he says, I believe this was in regards to the defendant calling Mo. Were they friends? Don't believe so. Had they ever met? Don't believe so. He later sends a message asking if she could talk and saying, I need to understand what is going on. She responded to him and said, sorry, I can't talk right now. On 1/11/22, there's a message between he and Kaitlin. He texts Kaitlin asking her to go and look in their gun box and get the McBride's receipt and take a picture of it and send it to him because he wanted to exchange one that he had the one he purchased for himself. He wanted to exchange it for a bigger gun because his hands were too big for the gun that he originally purchased, he said. And Dee responded with a pic of the gun case and the firearms that were in there, and then a picture of the receipt for 2 firearms and some ammo. It was dated 12/6/21. 1/12/22. So the next day, Kaitlin sends Colin a video of herself, slow-mo video of herself shooting the gun. When asked who it was, so we just got like a paused screenshot of it at first, and the state asked him to identify who it was, and he's like, I can't tell. I can't tell for sure. But then he admits it appears to be her shooting a firearm. The text that goes with it says, recoil is too intense to hold at the bottom. They played the video. It was super creepy. She was standing there with her arms like, straight out, shooting at the target that's down the range. And yeah, and it goes in slow-mo and you hear it, and she's like, she's got her hair like, it looked very blonde in this photo or in this video, and it was like in a braid going down her back, like right down the middle of her back. It was just creepy. On 3/12/22, Kaitlin inquires about a race and then later sends, so Colin was at a race without her. And then she later sends a message to Colin that says, send my love to Pete and Mo. And Colin explains that this was her passive-aggressive way of addressing a video he had posted to his Instagram stories of he and a group of like 10 to 20 people cheering in the last racers finishing the race. And in the back of that video, in the background, Mo was seen. And he responded back to her, can you please stop? So on 5/1/22, he's traveling back eastward from Cali, rolling through Tucson area and telling Kaitlin to fly out there and meet him. And then on that same day, there's a message about filing a complaint with the real estate commission over a dispute with a third party. He said some lawsuit. At 4:48 p.m., Caitlin's contacting him about matters related to the lawsuit. Oh, okay. So this is on 5/11. So the day of the murder. So Armstrong's sending him messages about the lawsuit. And then at 6:25, she texts him. And then later there's a call. And he doesn't respond to the text message. And he doesn't answer the call. And he was with Moriah at this point. At 8:36, he finally responds to her. And the reason he responded to her is because he had just dropped Mo off in the alleyway and stopped a block away and sent the text. I think 8:36 is actually the time that the door unlocks on Cash's locking app, right? And so this is his alibi message when he said he had just gotten done dropping off weed to a friend's son or something for her pain. At 8:43, he followed up. He didn't get him. He still hadn't gotten a response. At 9:21, he still had not heard a response from her, and he was home by that point, I believe. He said he was coming home, but I think he was actually already at home. Then we see that on 5/12/22 at 8ish in the morning, there's a message on there from Lance. He messaged about some bicycle wheels that he was purchasing and coming by his house to pick them up, and they were arranging that. And then at 10:23, he received a message from Lance that talks about how it said like, sorry your day started off with such terrible news, and then asks him about his Cash App or Venmo or something, like where he can send the money, because apparently he had gone by and he had gotten the wheels. So the state asked, did you tell him the news, like about Mo? And he said, I assume he talked to Kaitlin, and learned what happened. And he said, and then the state said, but did you talk to him that morning? He says, yes, he was pulling up as I was leaving to go to the station, and we had a brief exchange. I told him I was headed to the station to answer questions because a friend had died the night before. He must have talked to Kaitlin before he sent me that message. Okay, so then we see there is an email exchange between Kaitlin and Colin on 5/13/22. I think he sent her a message, and the state said, did you know where she was? And he said, I did not. They passed the witness. So next up is Rick Kofer, the defense attorney. And he starts off with right away. Right away, he says, I passed by the conference room this morning and I saw you in there. Who was that you were in there with? And I think like right away you could tell Colin was going to be even less cooperative than he had been with the state. You could tell it was going to be a hostile interaction. And he was being very, very evasive. And finally, Kofer gets him to say who was in there with him. And he says his attorney was in there, 3 reps from the DA's office, a friend that has insisted on chaperoning me through all of this. And Kofer says, did you talk to anyone about this case since Friday at 5? Because, Colin is under the rule, which means he's not allowed to talk about the case or discuss his testimony with anybody until he's released. And his response to Kofer in open court on the witness stand, on the record, is, I have no fucking idea. In Kennedy's courtroom. Kennedy is like super strict. I was scared for him when he said this. I was like, oh man, he is about to get it. Like, I was so scared. You have no idea. And the craziest thing happened. Nothing. Nobody said a word. Just kept it moving. Kept it moving. And he's super lucky for that. Nobody even addressed it. So then he says, Kofer says, can you name one person you discussed this case with since Monday? He names somebody. And Kofer asks if this guy is a witness in the case. And Colin says he is not. So then they move on to the Arkansas race, the cyclocross. KA attended, KA, that's my, if I say KA, that's Armstrong. Attended some of the events with him. Mo was also at the race. And then Kofer says, so you did not think she seemed upset on that trip, right? And he says, actually, she was quite perturbed about a meeting I didn't take her to. And then Kofer says, other than that, she wasn't upset. He says, no. She didn't seem jealous at any of the events, did she? Not at the events, but after, yes. Did you see KA and Mo have any interactions? They were in the same restaurant at the same time. Did you observe them interact in any way? I wasn't focused on it. Fair to say you did not see them interact. I did not. Did you ever think KA was jealous about Mo that weekend? I can't recall any specifics. Then they ask about somebody named, I think they said David Peace. Anyway, an employee that worked for their Wheelhouse Mobile company. He says yes. On May 11th, you asked him to move vehicles that you owned, correct? And Colin's like, I asked him to move vehicles? And he's like, yeah, you asked him to drive the white Mercedes you own from your home in Lockhart to Austin, asking him to drive the truck you own from Austin to Lockhart. Don't recall. Do you recall leaving the keys to the truck for him? I don't recall. Do you recall where you would keep the keys? in the bowl. Same place that Armstrong kept her keys? Yes. He had access to the keys, correct? Yes. Then he wants him to name the vehicles that are parked on his property. He says he's got 2 pickups, 2 Mercedes, a BMW motorcycle, a Ducati motorcycle, and another kind of motorcycle. Any other vehicles at your property that you did not own, but you exercised control of and possession over? And he's like, well, define control, define possession. Finally, Kofor just says, tell me about your mom's car. And he says, it's a white Honda Fit. Frequently at your property, correct? Yes. Why? Because my mom lived with me 6 months out of the year. Sometimes Kaitlin drove the Fit. Oh, and then he says, who drove the Fit? And Colin says, sometimes Kaitlin drove it. I very rarely drove it. Sometimes it was parked in the driveway. Sometimes it was on the street. Did you previously own a black SUV? Correct. When did you get rid of it? Oh, let's see. It had misfiring issues in 2020, I believe. Accurate to say that the black SUV you owned when you were with KA had a bike rack. Briefly, correct. She didn't have any emotional attachment to her Jeep, right? She often told me she loved her Jeep, so I don't know. So to be clear, you're saying she did have an emotional attachment to her Jeep, correct? No. So you're saying she did not have an attachment to the Jeep? I can't answer that. It's an arbitrary question. Then he asks to approach the witness. He tries to refresh his recollection. And then he follows up with, you think she viewed her Jeep as utilitarian, correct? Sorry, I have no idea how I spelled that. Yes, you testified on Friday that no one ever used her Jeep, correct? No, I didn't say it as an absolute statement. I would never do that. I would never. So you are aware that other people would occasionally use her Jeep, correct? I would not know that for certain. That's not something you previously told law enforcement? Sure. He just says sure. And then Kofor says, you were the one that told her after 5/12, so after the meeting with the detectives, that she should sell her Jeep, right? And Colin says, I don't recall that. That's super creepy and weird if he did tell her that, though. Because at that point, he already knew that, I mean, he had already been given the information about them thinking that her car was at the crime scene. And Auntie would know that, like, if that's the case, then this is all because of him. I really hope he didn't tell her to sell her car and run. Anyway, the fact that he said, I don't recall that is just so odd to me. Then they go over the devices. They talk about the Apple iCloud account and the passwords, and the password to the Apple laptop. He says, I don't recall. It's been changed several times. Did you use the same code for multiple devices? Very likely, yes, because my mom was using the iPad occasionally. But the laptop has letters and numbers, not just numbers. So it wasn't the same as the phone and the iPad, correct? Yes. You testified that KA got into your phone and blocked Mo's phone, correct? Yes. Oh, and then here we go. This was an annoying line of questioning. It went on and on and on. You received some messages from Mo, right? Yes, I believe I did get some of them. So not all of them were blocked, I guess. I eventually realized that she had been blocked, and I don't know how that happened, but I realized she had been blocked and unblocked her at some point. Why didn't you tell police that on 5/12 or 5/17? Because those were his 2 interview dates. Why is this the first time that you have ever brought it up? It seems like something I would investigate, but I don't specifically remember doing it. Have you ever placed a specific contact on no notifications? That setting would mean that you don't receive notifications from someone when they send your phone a message. He says no. So you never placed anyone on notifications. And then he says, I think there are some emails and stuff on there. And then Cofer says, you sat down with the DA and reviewed a list of blocked contacts, correct? Yes. Did anything appear incorrect on that spreadsheet? Define incorrect. Being super evasive. Asking for definitions of words and not answering. 71 blocked phone numbers when you reviewed it, correct? Earlier today, you thought it was possible that Kaitlin had blocked those numbers, correct? Or 4 of them. So it's safe to say there are 60 something other phone numbers that you yourself blocked. And Colin will never agree to this, almost like he doesn't even understand how a cell phone works. He says, most of them did not have any info attached to them. They were just an email or a phone number. So I think what he's trying to say is like, they weren't blocked contacts because they weren't actually contacts in my phone. And what Cofer's trying to say is like, but they're blocked numbers. And so I'm not sure that Cofer's point is that valid, because I think what Colin is saying, which they really don't do a good job of getting across to the jury, I don't think. But I think what Colin is saying is that they're spam, right? They're spam. They're just random numbers calling him, and that's why they get blocked. And Cofer's saying, you block a whole bunch of numbers. Like, why would we believe that you didn't block these 4 numbers? But I think that Colin and the state are trying to say, no. All those other 60 something are random numbers that have never been a contact in his phone. He's never spoken to these people, or their email addresses. And so then Cofer says some 71 phone numbers that were blocked and 17 emails, correct? Let's say somewhere. Then Cofer says, okay, so let's say that Kaitlin read every single message you sent to Mo. Would the content of those messages upset her? And he says, I couldn't say it. Depends on her emotional state at the time. And he says, did you and Mo send each other naked pics? No. Talk about sex? No. Share your emotions and heart with each other? No, we did not. Safe to say that to the regular outsider, y'all's messages are boring. Colin says, I can't speak to that. Then Cofer has the state pull up their exhibit regarding the 5/11/22 morning text between he and Mo. This is the one that the state had asked him about, that they got off of the extraction, but it wasn't actually on his physical text thread on his phone when they seized the phone, which would indicate that that one message had been erased, right, or deleted. So they pull up this message, and it's a message. Well, actually, it's a message he sent back, or he sent to Mo at around 11 in the morning on 5/11. It said, I never heard from you. Now, I don't know if I told you actually what the message Mo had sent him that morning said, but the 9:00 a.m. message that he earlier said he never got said, what you thinking, in regards to plans for their ride that day, right? Well, he claimed earlier to the state that he never got that message. Or that it was erased, right? So I think what he was saying is that he never got it, but he never makes that clear. And then I think he forgets about that by the time he gets here. So Cofer says, so you sent her this message that says, I never heard from you, right? Because y'all were attempting to make plans. And he says, yes. And then Cofer says, she had in fact reached out to you earlier, correct? And he said, I don't recall the timeline. Then they pull up the what you thinking. You told her you had not heard from her, but you had, correct? Do you sometimes receive messages and just act like you didn't get them? And Colin's like, what? And then he says, it appears they were received from my phone. At this point, it seems like he is like super worn out. He's exhausted. He's beyond done, and also just very confused. And so I don't think he remembers that earlier on direct, he says he's not the person that deleted that text from his phone and that he never got it. Okay, so then they go over the Colorado photo. He asked if Colin's familiar with sexting? And he says, no. He says, you've never heard the term? He says, I have never heard a definition of it. Can you define it? This is what Colin says to Cofer. And Cofer says, no. In your own opinion, what does that term mean to you? And he says, I have no idea. It sounds ridiculous. And then Cofer says, how'd you meet the woman? Don't remember. How long had y'all been texting when you got that? Don't remember. You didn't tell her you were in a relationship with KA, did you? No, it was during one of those on-off periods. Like, also, what did she look like in the photo? She was wearing jeans and a brassiere, is what Colin said, and standing in front of a mirror. How'd you respond? At the time, you were in a relationship with Kaitlin, right? And he says, we were not married. She was living in my home, yes, if that's what you mean. Most would call that a relationship, wouldn't they? Is what Cofer says. He asks Cofer how that question is relevant. He says, I don't understand. How is this relevant? And then Cofer gets pretty annoyed and says he can appreciate that, but it's actually his turn to do his turn to ask the questions or something. He says, you didn't tell KA about the pic, did you? And he says, no. Why? I don't recall. So you never discouraged it. You didn't tell Kaitlin that it was sent to you. You wanted to visit this girl, and you feel that it is unfair that she is upset about it? And Colin says, no, it was 10 months later that he wanted to visit her and get coffee or whatever. And Cofer says, you didn't feel it was fair for her to be upset about you getting coffee with this woman. Do you recall telling investigators you did not believe that she had ever gone through your phone prior to October 2021? He says he doesn't recall that. And then Cofer says, before Friday, you had never said anything about the Colorado woman to investigators. And then Cofer asks, do you have any screenshots of this convo with KA about the Colorado lady? And Colin says, I don't have my phone. It was seized. And he says, do you have any hard proof that she got in your phone? And he says, I don't know. What's hard proof? And he says, do you have any direct evidence that KA got into your phone? And he says, depends on what direct evidence means. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. Do you have any evidence that she got into your phone? I can't speak to that. I'm not a detective. And then Cofer says, okay, but isn't it true that you were in relationships before Kaitlin, and it was actually you who went through their phones, correct? And Colin agrees with him. And so then they turn their attention to the home on Fort Clark and some of the evidence from there. Photos of the living room. They asked for a sidebar before publishing. There's a photo of a dish where you kept keys in the Fort Clark home, and it was in the living room. Are you aware that they found marijuana during the search? Yes. Was that yours? Yes. Are you aware that they found mushrooms during the search? Were those yours too? No, those were Kaitlin's. How many doors were there? He says 4 if you count the garage door entrance. Any door that provided an entry into your home. Oh, okay, 5. Do any of them have electronic entry? Yes. Okay, so now you changed the code since 5/11, but back then it was 6644. And it was common for you to share that code with people, correct? And then he says I wouldn't say it was common. And then Cofer's like, well, would it surprise you if I told you that between this date and this date, you shared it 90 times or something crazy? And at this time, he's definitely being questioned like this. And Cofer's up at the witness stand going over the text exchanges with him. Oh, because this is what he's about to introduce, which are text messages between he and 5 people, I think it was. And in all of those messages, apparently he gave out the code to the gate. they didn't actually show us any of these text messages. They just entered them into evidence. And he says, good news, the jury's going to have the opportunity to view that later, but fair to say they are all instances where you share your code with others. I guess Colin says yes. He says, you were popular in racing, right? Companies paid you because you were popular, right? He says, that's subjective. They paid me because I won races and sold merchandise. Common to have others in racing community come over to your house, correct? Correct. It wasn't rare for people to come to your house, right? During the week leading up to 5/11, y'all were both out of town and returned on 5/9, correct? And he says, I believe so. On 5/11, you went on a bike ride that started and ended at Fort Clark, right? Yes. You got home after the bike ride at about 1:50. Don't recall. The records show that. Does it sound accurate? Yes. Was Kaitlin at home then? Don't remember. On Friday, you said that you drove to Cash's apartment in the Cherrywood neighborhood, correct? And he says, I don't recall. Then his recollection is refreshed. I drove to the apartment she was staying at in the Cherrywood neighborhood. So when he was asked to refresh his recollection, he just like read it straight from the document out loud. And he was actually supposed to just read it in his head, but he blurted it out. So he read it into the record. So Colin says, describe for me what you understand the Cherrywood neighborhood to be. And he says, north of 7th Street and east of 35. And Colin says, Kofor says, you wouldn't be personally familiar with the boundaries of the Cherrywood neighborhood, right? Do you know what the neighborhood directly south of Cherrywood is and that its southernmost border being that of MLK? Colin's like, no. Are you aware that Cash's neighborhood is called the Chestnut neighborhood and not Cherrywood, not in Cherrywood at all? And he says, well, I am now. But and then Colin goes, but you called it Cherrywood, right? And he's like, yes, I did. Were Mo's arm around you when she was on the back of the motorcycle? He says it's possible. Either they were or they weren't. Were they on you? I don't recall. She did have a helmet though, right? Yes. It is your helmet, right? Yes. Armstrong has also worn the same helmet, right? She was sitting on the same seat that Kaitlin has also sat on, right? Her arms were around you, right? Before you left Poolberger, did you put on a jacket? You did, didn't you? I don't think so. I don't think I actually did. You interviewed on 5/12 with Spittler, right? Before you left Poolberger, you put a jacket on, right? I think I put one on when I was leaving Cash's apartment, when I was about to get onto a highway. If you were wearing a jacket, then her hands would have been on the jacket, correct? Could have been. So what they're trying to do here is I think they're trying to get at transfer DNA. However, I think that might be a stretch because the DNA that was found on the bicycle, like handlebars and seat or wherever it was, I haven't heard any evidence that there was like an unknown male DNA there, right? Wouldn't if the DNA came off of him, wouldn't it likely also have his DNA on it if it was transfer? Anyway, I do think it's a stretch. But what are they going to do? Got to do something. Okay. You ran into someone you knew at Deep Betty, right? So Deep Betty is the pool where they went swimming. And he says, yeah, I did. And what was the person's name? Can't remember. At Poolberger, you also ran into someone you knew, right? Yes. Someone that he used to work with. Did that person know that you had a sexual relationship with Mo? No. Did they know that you were in a relationship with Kaitlin? No. Were you worried about that info getting out? No. Did y'all have sex on 5/11? No. On Saturday, October 28th of this year, we talked on the phone, correct? Meaning Kofor and Colin Strickland, just a short time before trial. I asked to speak with you and you chose to speak with me, and he says yes. Was there anything you shared with me that you would like to change? No. You said you have actively tried to forget these details, right? Were you allowed to review your police interviews before testifying? He says it was offered, but he chose not to. So this is all based on memory, right? Yes. And you actively tried to forget as much as possible and admit memory fades, right? Yes. While at Pullburger, you saw the call come in from Kaitlin in real time and chose not to answer it. Yes. Did you get a notification when you were with Mo from Kaitlin about a message? Did you read the message and choose to ignore it? And I think he says he doesn't remember. And then Kofor says, okay, well, you know Kaitlin Armstrong well, correct? And he says, no, I don't. And like a lot of people thought that that was weird, but I think that I could understand where he was coming from when he said that, because I think his point is like, he thought he knew her, but the fact that she did this, because I think he clearly believes she did, the fact that she did this means that he actually never knew her at all, because he would have never known. I mean, he would have never expected her to do something like this. That he was like so super shocked about this, and he's like never talked to her again. Pretty much after the 13th or whatever, you know. So yeah, he's super mad at her, and so he says he doesn't know her at all. I get that. And then Cooper says, how would she have responded if you answered and said you were getting a bite to eat with Mo Wilson and would be home later? And Colin says, I have no idea. She wasn't mad about the unanswered communications when she got home the night of the 11th, was she? No. You sent her a text at 9:21 p.m., correct? And you told Spittler that she rolled up a few minutes after you sent that text at 9:21, right? You said she appeared completely normal when she drove up a few minutes after 9:21 p.m., right? Now, it took you at least 15 minutes to drive home from Cash's, correct? Yes. She didn't seem frazzled that night? No. Y'all didn't discuss what she'd been doing that night? Don't recall. Never claimed that she told you she was at yoga or Target or with a friend, right? Don't recall. That night, she never said anything to you to suggest that she was planning an alibi, right? I don't recall. After you spoke to detectives, before you went to the station, you spoke to Kaitlin and told her you had been with Mo the night before, correct? Yes. Was she upset at all when she heard you had been with Mo? Didn't seem that way. She seemed shocked, right? Yes. Didn't occur to you that she was faking, right? No, that never entered my mind. You interviewed with Spittler and right? Whoa, what just happened? Why is my signal so bad? Okay, I can't tell if this is working, but hopefully it is. Anyway, my internet is like the worst ever. They're sending somebody out today, but it's not going to be till like late tonight. So we're just working with what we've got. Hold on, I have to actually check something. Okay, so they ask you, okay, so he met with detectives on the 12th of May and the 17th of May. And in between then he spoke with he got a criminal defense lawyer, right? And Kofor says, and after you spoke to your criminal defense attorney, you decided to separate yourself from Kaitlin Armstrong, right? And he says, yes. Do you know if Kaitlin also spoke to an attorney and got the same advice? No, I don't know. You decided to stop contact after 5:13 with Armstrong, correct? And he says, well, I don't know that that's true. I was told that, but I think I tried to contact her after I got the phone turned on, but I was told not to. That is correct. When you interviewed with Spittler, you asked if Mo's bike had been stolen, right? Yes. You hadn't been told anything about the bike at that point, right? And he says, No. You asked if the bike had been stolen and no one prompted you to ask that, right? Correct. During the 517 interview, you told detective about vandalism to your motorcycle, it being pushed into Kaitlin Armstrong's Jeep and it looked like it had been pushed so hard it actually caused a dent. It looked like somebody had pushed it over, right? And he says, yes. And then someone also flipped over 20 stone. Yes. How much do they weigh? 3 to 6 pounds each. And he said, you had no doubt that someone intentionally turned them over, right? And he says, correct. And you found 2 $1 bills at the end of the stone pavers, right? And he says, yes. And you know this happened late on 512 or early on 513, correct? Yes. You were with Kaitlin the entire time, correct? He says, yes. She didn't go outside, right? And he says, not that I know of, but I went to sleep. And then Kofor says, you said maybe it was a homeless person. And he says, correct. And then I think Kofor says, well, how many homeless people do you know that turn over pavers and leave money behind? Anyway, he says you took photos of the vandalism, correct? Kofor says, Colin says, I don't recall. Did anyone follow up with you on the vandalism at your home? He says, I don't know. Did you ever get a satisfactory answer as to who committed the vandalism? No. You never had vandalism at your home before this incident that occurred about 24 hours before Mo's death, correct? He says, correct. During your first interview, you felt that the detectives were pushing a narrative, but during the second interview, you felt that they were leading a narrative, correct? He said he didn't recall, refresh his recollection. You felt that they were just trying to lead you along during the second interview. You told your lawyer you wanted to tell detectives, fuck you guys for manipulating me, correct? He says yes. And so the way that we know this is because there's actually a transcript there's a transcript of his second interrogation with police or with the detectives where he went in with his criminal defense attorney and he's telling her this when the detectives have left the recording, right? So I have a transcript of all of it. Okay, so then they talk about the relationship with Kaitlin. On Friday, you described your relationship with Kaitlin as tumultuous. Do you know how it's defined? And I don't remember what his answer was. Oh, and then he gave like 2 definitions. And then he asked, was there any violence, any destruction of property, any thrown objects, any screaming at each other, any abuse of each other, any calling the cops on each other? You didn't even argue much, right? And he says, right. Not volatile, right? With the exception of the few incidents that have been referenced. I suppose I meant tumultuous within myself, internally, rather than between the two of us. That makes sense. And then Kofor says, okay, well, you said one of the things that made you worried about forming a long-term relationship with Kaitlin was right. And he says, yes, fast fashion. And Colin says, okay, so then what about her clothes exactly was it that made you so concerned? He says, well, this was by no means a singular issue, but it's that they were disposable and from Asia. Kofor says, it's fair to say that that's a you issue and not a Kaitlin issue. And he says, yup. And I think like the courtroom laughed. You said she wasn't athletic enough to keep up with you, but she was actually very athletic before she met you, correct? You know, she was in yoga, she went to all these retreats, blah, blah, blah. You said you introduced her to your cycling friends, but it's not like she didn't have friends. She had yoga friends, right? And he said, I don't know. She was always asking you to go along to yoga with her, correct? And you never went with her? Yeah, I had no interest in yoga. You wanted her to manage your finances, correct? She didn't trick you into it, right? Y'all bought a house together in Lockhart, correct? Y'all owned a business together, correct? And then he says, technically, yes, correct, because she formed an LLC in October of 2021. Okay, now we're going to talk about Mo. You and Mo had a fling for a week in October, November of 2021, and we're having sex with her, correct? You were 35 and she was 25, and Mo had just gotten out of a relationship, right? Were you taking advantage of her emotional state after her breakup? And he says, no. You were widely respected in the cycling community, right? You claim to be a mentor to Mo, right? Is it common to have sex with someone you mentor? You were with Kaitlin days before you started your relationship with Mo, right? And within days of your relationship ending with Mo, you were back having sex with Kaitlin again, right? And he says, not exactly. It was like a 4-week window or something like that. During your relationship with Mo, you were aware that Kaitlin had gone on a trip to Mexico alone and seemingly spontaneously. You also testified that she went to Bali during y'all's relationship, correct? Yes. What other travel are you aware of? I believe she lived in Bali before us meeting, and maybe Singapore, Thailand, Iceland, repeatedly to Mexico. For the most part, the travel was related to her yoga practice. Correct. You were in love with Kaitlin before this case? I was. Did you lie to Spittler to protect Kaitlin? I don't believe so. You were advised of your rights during your meeting with Spittler, right? I don't know. You told him the truth during that interview, right? And Colin says yes. And then he says, October 2019, y'all started dating. Were you going on other dates with other women that you met through that app when you started your relationship? And he said no. Were y'all exclusive starting in October of 2019? And he says, I believe so. Late February or early March of 2020 was their first breakup, but she was actually in Bali during that breakup, correct? And he says yes. And then Colin says, y'all got back together after COVID shut everything down, right? And he says, yeah. How long were y'all broken up? Were you having sex with other people? Were you sexting with other people? Were you flirting with other people? Were you dating other people? Why did y'all break up? And then he says, I explained it to her. I think all his answers to those previous questions were, I can't recall. And then his answer is to why y'all broke up. I explained it to her in a long text. You can reference it if you want. But to the best of my knowledge, because I did not believe we had enough in common to forge a long-term relationship. Y'all had started living together, correct? Yes, she asked me and I let her. She had no running water at her. Did y'all have any breakups? Yes. Did you have sex with other women? Don't recall. Did you date other women? Don't recall. In the fall of 2021, y'all broke up, and that breakup lasted like 5 weeks, correct? You described the breakup as a blip, an interruption, right? No, I intended it to be final. He kept saying, no, I intended it to be final so many times. And then he approached and refreshed his recollection. And then he said, I referenced it in hindsight as a blip, not, I didn't see it as a blip in that moment. Later, looking back on it, it was just a blip. Then y'all got back together, right? Yes. During that blip, you know she dated other people. Yes. And you and Kaitlin broke up on the way home from that race, right? Y'all slept in the same home that night, right? Yes. Y'all had sex that night? I don't think so. You didn't kick her out, right? No. She was a legal resident of your home when you started your relationship with Mo, right? You were aware that Kaitlin was using dating apps, right? Were you and Mo very close? Were you in love? And he says, like, define close or something. And then he says, were you in love with her? And he said, I don't think it had gotten to that point. We hadn't spent very much time together at that point. Was the purpose of her Austin visit to see you or some other reason? And he said, I think she was here to see 2 friends that lived in Bolden Creek as well as Cash. Did you have constant strife with Kaitlin Armstrong regarding your relationship with Mo? And I think he said no. And then he said, after y'all got back together, did Kaitlin ever tell you not to have contact with Mo? And he says, I don't recall. You changed Mo's contact in your phone to a different name, right? And you deleted your entire prior text thread at the same time, right? There was nothing stopping you on 5/11 from telling Kaitlin you were going to hang out with Mo. Is it fair to say that you changed Mo's name in your phone because you just didn't want to tell Kaitlin about it? you knew that having an emotional conversation about Mo would be annoying, right? And he said, probably a little more than annoying. You don't like to have emotional conversations, do you? And he says, no. The reason you changed the name wasn't because you thought Kaitlin Armstrong had a problem with Mo. It was just because you didn't want to deal with it, right? I think she did have a problem with Mo, just as I would with any of her exes if I had taken the time to research them. You described her in wonderful terms in both interviews and said she wasn't particularly jealous, right? First person to ever bring up that KA was jealous was Detective Spittler, right? You have had jealous girlfriends in the past, and she didn't seem that way, right? Are you aware of Amity Rockwell, right? Yes. Are you aware she warned Mo not to get involved with you? At some point before Kaitlin Armstrong relationship, you had a sexual relationship with Rockwell, right? Yes. Rockwell was a cyclist, and you continued hanging out with her after you were in a relationship with Armstrong, right? Do you ever recall Armstrong displaying any jealousy regarding Rockwell? No. You stayed with someone named Morgan Rojas in California in May of 22, right? Not true. She has a friend that lives in LA, and we had dinner when I was there. Did you have a sexual relationship with her before Armstrong? Yes. And Armstrong was not jealous, right? No. Hannah Stone, little sister Christina. He says, I don't know. They move on. Virginia. Who's that? Someone I dated in 2017. You made a text thread with you and Armstrong and encouraged her to go on a bike ride with Virginia. Did she ever display any jealousy regarding this? And he said, I don't recall. You did lie to Armstrong on 5/11, correct? You didn't tell her you were meeting up with Mo, right? You lied to her. The reason wasn't because you thought she had a problem with Mo. You lied to her because you didn't want to get caught. Fair to say that you lied to Armstrong because you didn't want to deal with it, right? Yes. You know Kaitlin Armstrong called Mo in October of 2021, right? He says, yes. You told police about that, right? He says, I don't recall. Right before Armstrong called Mo, she had asked you where her helmet was. You were aware she called Mo looking for her helmet because she thought you lent it to Mo, right? And I think that there was an objection, like hearsay, and then there was a sidebar, and then he came back and continued on a different question. He said, you couldn't imagine Armstrong being capable of hurting anyone, correct? Correct. Said Armstrong had never done anything violent in her life. Don't recall. Sounds right. I assume you're reading a transcript, so I'll just say yes. Because he didn't want Kofor to get back up and refresh his recollection. Throughout, you thought Armstrong was a softie and she had never been violent, right? Yes. It was your impression in May of 22 that Armstrong was at peace in y'all's relationship, right? On the way home from West Texas, y'all talked about your relationship, right? You told her you didn't want her to attend races anymore because she was a distraction and required attention. Yes, because she required me to maintain her bicycle and my own, and it was too much to focus on and still perform at a level I needed to. She didn't have a problem with this, did she? No. During the whole time from 2019 to May of 2022, did you have sex with anyone other than Kaitlin? Yes. Anyone other than Mo? No. You were friends with many other women in the cycling community, right? Yes. She wasn't jealous of any of those women, right? I don't think that is correct. All of them are still okay, though, right? Yeah. That is just such a weird thing for her own defense attorney to ask Colin. Like, she must not have been jealous of them because they're still alive. Are you sure you want to ask that? Okay, then they talk about the firearms and like, uh, how Kaitlin didn't ask him to buy the firearm, and he's like, well, she, picked out the one she wanted, whatever. Then in the afternoon, we get redirect. Oh, so I had to leave early. They ended up going through some like evidence in the courtroom and having him open it. I know that there was One of them was a gun. One was something he didn't know. One of them was a magazine for one of the guns. I think he also asked Colin to manipulate the locks, and he couldn't. He didn't know how to, or somebody asked him to. I think that happened. But anyway, so when we came back from lunch, she came out and I wrote a note. Her hair was different. So normally her hair, every single time she comes out, is like this, pulled over to this one side. And so most family has like a full profile view of Kaitlin for the entire trial, right? Because she sits like ahead over here, the family's back here, and she keeps her hair to this side. So she's giving them a clear profile view of her, right? When she came out from uh when she came out from the holding area after lunch, her hair was different for the first time. And it was like, I wasn't the only one that noticed, like other people noticed as well. She had her hair like this. I don't know if she's like trying to be flirty with Colin or what, but she actually didn't put it back, at least not for a while. So that was very weird. So state did redirect. And asked when she got home, was she driving her black SUV with the bike wrap? He said yes. Oh, maybe it's David Keese is the person. And so the state asked, was David Keese with her? That's the employee. He says no. Does he know Mo? No. Does he know Mo was in Austin? No. Does he know where Mo was staying? All no. So then they go back over the blocked numbers, and Guillermo just tries to get him to confirm that those blocked numbers were actually spam. And never does that. Then he tries to get him to go back to the deleted message that he got at 9:00 a.m. on 5/11 from Mo. And he says, why didn't you respond to her that morning? And Colin says, I don't recall which text you're referring to. The one when you were on your bike ride? I think because I was on a ride. So you're saying there's a difference between you not responding to a text for whatever reason and you not responding to a text because you never received it. And he just says, yes, they appear to be two different things. Okay. Then he says, do you think any of the people that you texted do you think they knew where Mo was staying? No. Or that she was even in Austin? No. When you were on the West Coast, was the defendant using your motorcycle while you were gone? And he says no. And they say why? He says it was 600 pounds. It was too heavy for her to ride. So it was sitting in her arm. She had her own helmet, and the vast majority of the time, you wore your helmet and she wore hers, right? Right. Do you even recall the last time before 5/11 that she rode on your bike? And he says, I don't know. And the prosecutor says, well, it had to have been at least 3 to 4 weeks because you were gone, right? And he says, conceivably. Okay. Is it hot in your garage? Very. And that's where you store it when you're not using it, right? And he says, correct. On 5/11, did the defendant ride on your motorcycle? No. Today you said your house was never vandalized before 5/12, 5/13, right? Correct. But you told us on Friday that your neighbor across the street's house was seriously vandalized, correct? That was actually one of the reasons that you purchased the firearms. He says, correct. Is it your opinion that Armstrong had a problem with Mo? And he says, yes. Phone call to Mo. Is it your recollection of the comment? I'm not certain exactly what was said during the phone call. Do you recall what the demeanor was of Miss Wilson when she discussed the call with you? She found it strange. And by this point, so this is the afternoon, he seemed like the internet sucks. He had like a problem, like his talking had slowed a lot. His voice was softer. His and he was also having like a hard time understanding, remembering the answers to questions that he had given earlier that day, and also like recalling questions that he had been asked. And also, he was having a harder time understanding questions at this point. Is that you saved Mo as Christine in your phone. He had to get his he had to get refreshed. And then his answer just like it makes no sense. He doesn't ever answer like the thing he's supposed to be answering. He's like, because I felt a right to maintain a friendship with an ex-girlfriend without constant strife. Do you recall being further questioned about that and giving further response that same day to detectives? They have to go back up and look at the document again. What did you tell them? I felt that I had a right to maintain some sort of blah, 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 blah. And then the state just has to say, okay, and did you say something about the D looking through your phone? Yes, I think. Said in the past it had been a source of fights. Do you remember discussing? Okay. And he has to go back up there and like show him where he said like a specific date. Do you remember discussing the value of Mo's bicycle with detectives? Yes. What did you tell them about the value? It's the most valuable gravel